Okay, so what we're going to do today, at least at the beginning, is I know this lesson is titled Inequalities, but I feel like I want to just finish off quadratic equations, or give it a bit more love, basically, and make sure that it, because it's an important topic, and I feel like we can use half the lesson for inequalities, and that will be fine. So basically, let us start with a wonderful selection of quadratic equations, and I just want to choose, let's put the fractions and those things out the way for now. My first three questions for the day are going to be these three. I can even zoom in a little bit. I'll save that one for a little bit later. And I just want to outline what is a quadratic equation and how is it different and what are some of the strategies. Okay, so the reason I know that the first one is a quadratic equation is it has a power of 2. So that kind of gives it away. The second one is a little bit of a quadratic equation in disguise, because when I get rid of the fraction, I'm going to get a quadratic equation. And then this one, I know it's quadratic because it's got a power of 2. Now, in the last lesson, we used different techniques to solve quadratic equations, and probably at school you've seen some of them. But I would love to see how many of you can do question, I'm going to call this A, this B, and this C. I pretty much want to focus on just question A. And I want to see how many of us can get the answers to question A. When you've got the answer, put it in the chat. If you're on fire, go on to B and then on to C. This is kind of like our red light, green light, orange light, red light. But basically, I want everyone's attention on A. Once you can answer it, put your answer in the chat. I will, depending on how many answers I get, I will do some working and then move on to B and then on to C, and just see how comfortable you are solving quadratic equations. If you need a hint, Miss Anya will give you a hint in the chat. So you may say, oh, I'm so stuck, I don't know where to go. Miss Anya, please feel free to give them a hint in the right direction. I just want to get a feel for how much we've retained from the last lesson. And I've also thrown in some fractions too. And then while we're doing that, I can even take questions audibly too if students would like to ask them.
Okay, so I just see we've got a few people that are stuck. So I'm also missing it. I don't know if we hinted them to first maybe factorize, maybe that, or, that's something that should help you guys a little bit. When you see something like that, make your equation equal to 0 like A is, and factorize. That's the only bit I'm going to say today. And I think I deserve a chocolate just for saying that.
So in the past, so just to give you a little review from last time, if we gave you a quadratic equation like this was very easy because you can square root both sides, okay? And then you can get x is plus or minus 3. But the problem is that if you don't just have one variable, if you have two variables, so here you have a variable over here and you have a term with a variable, you have to use a different strategy. And I think possibly what I should do is give you like a checklist for that. So step one is, if it's not an easy quadratic, step one is move everything until you get 0 on one side. And then step 2 is to factorize. We did this at the beginning of the last lesson. And then after you factorize, and I'll go through these steps with you now, it's going to be split. And then the fourth step is going to be solve. Now, in the case of B, you actually have to do a bit of work first before you can move things around, but that's kind of gobbled up by the move. So let's go through those steps for A. Is everything on one side? I think it is, because I got the 0 here. The next step for a quadratic is to factorize it. Now, I would like in the chat, what methods of factorization have you learned about before? Can you give me in the chat different methods of factorization that are available? And then for those of you who are feeling very comfortable, just move ahead on to B and C. But I think I want to spend a bit of time revising factorization. What process?
So while we're on that, sorry to interrupt you. So I'm getting quite a few direct messages from multiple learners.
Okay.
I definitely think we need to possibly just focus a bit on factorization, because a lot of them are asking, is this okay? Should I do that? Should I do that?
All right.
Yeah.
So let's do a little mini lesson. If we look at factorization, the first technique we use for factorization is what's called common factor, or highest common factor is maybe another way of saying it. Now, you may have heard of that before, you may not. I will show it to you now. So that's the first thing you check. Is there a highest common factor that I can take out that exists in these two terms? Then later on, we check for things called difference of two squares. And then the third thing we eventually check for is something called a trinomial factorization. So if you want, I would start by just making sure you know the different techniques of factorization that you can apply. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move B and C out the way. So those students who want to move on to B and C, could you please just write them down? They're going to be hiding at the bottom here, but I just want to move them out of the way for the moment so that they are not the focus of attention. Okay. So now, in this particular process, in question A, the goal is to solve for the variable t. And it's a quadratic equation because it has a power of 2. So my goal is to find what is t at the very beginning, at the end. However, in order to do that, I have to, according to this checklist, I have to factorize this thing. And if I look at the two terms, if I'm going to factorize it, the one thing I notice is that both of these terms have a 7 in common. And both of these terms have a t in common. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out that 7t as what's called the highest common factor. But now, when you factorize something, it means that if you multiply it out again, you would get back to the original thing. So what do I need to multiply 7t by to get to 7t squared? Well, I think I need to multiply by t. Okay. Then in the next line, in order to get to 14t, I'm going to have plus 2. And so this is what we call the factorization step. And you will get a chance to do more of this later in the lesson, I promise, because I think we do need practice on this. Okay, now the second step. The second step is what's called the split. And the split basically takes advantage of this idea that if 7t is 0, then 0 times anything is still 0, and the equation is true. So I'm going to write 7t is 0, or t plus 2 is 0. And the reason that is helpful is that if this whole thing was 0, the equation is made true. If this whole thing is 0, the equation is made true. So I only need one of these to be true for the whole equation to work. So now I would like you guys to solve these last two linear equations for me. Can you give me the answer and put the answer in the chat? What are the two answers for A? It's going to be, you have to use stuff from earlier in this module, but you're going to get t as something here, or t as something there. And then for my students who are working on the next one, I will bring these back into focus for you. Oh, I made it a little bit. Okay, I see the answers coming through. If I divide both sides by 7, I will get t as 0 here. And if I take away 2 on both sides for this next one, I'm going to get that. And so my answer for this is t is 0 or t is minus 2. If you want to check this, you can always sub these answers back into the original. There needs to be 2 answers. Yes, David, you're right, because it's a quadratic equation. Unless you have, there are some situations with the quadratic formula where that gets a bit tricky, but we'll talk about that much later. Okay. I want to suggest that everybody, I know I said that this was B, but I actually think B is harder. I want everyone to try and do question C now. And I want you to try and use the checklist that I gave you above here. I'm wondering how I can move things around. Let's see if you've probably written it down. So I want everybody to do question C first, and I want you to try and solve the quadratic equation C, and then you move on to B. Now, what's the first step in my little checklist? It was to move everything to one side so that you have 0 on one side. So how do you do that with this question? What do you need to do? I like to have my y squareds positive, so I think I want a 0 on this side. Now, if only I could move these across. Oh, I know what I can do. I can take away 13y from both sides, and then I can add 42 to both sides, and I get this. Okay. Now I'm a little bit stuck. I have to go back to my checklist. So I've moved everything to one side. Now I need to factorize. Now, what are the different techniques of factorization available? Is there a highest common factor in this line? It doesn't look like to me, guys. Is there a difference of 2 squares? No. And also, you may not know exactly what that is. There will be modules later from Watobe that concentrate on this. And there are even going to be grade 10 modules that will focus on this too. But really what you need to do is you need to use what's called the trinomial factorization technique. And I actually want to know from the class, if you know how to factorize a trinomial, give me a thumbs up. If you really struggle with factorizing trinomials, give me a thumbs down. And that will help me understand how much time to put into this next thing here. So thumbs up if you can factorize a trinomial, thumbs down if you're really struggling. And whilst you do that, I'm just going to grab another example for my speedy ones who are just getting carried away.
So,
yes.
I know we're speeding up a bit, but I know one of the students mentioned this last week.
Yes.
Some students have asked in the past if it's fine if they use the quadratic equation.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't think we're ready to touch on that today, but if there are students that know how to use it, I think that should be fine, right?
It will be fine. Generally, students learn that in grade 11, but I don't mind if they know how to use it, but I'm not going to well, they'd learn it in grade 11, but a little bit later in the year. So I'm going to stay with this for now, but you are welcome to use that.
Perfect.
So what is my thumbs up and thumbs down? Were people needing a bit of, okay, here's the reminder of how you do a trinomial. What's the split on the thumbs up, thumbs down?
I'd say go through the trinomial once more. It's more thumbs down than up.
Okay. In order to factorize a trinomial, what you're really doing is you're taking what is here, and the reason it's called a trinomial is that it has 3 terms. And what you ask yourself is, most of the time I use this, I call it the cross method, in order to allow you to multiply 4 things out to end up with 3. I know that sounds like a mouthful, but basically at the very end of this, you're going to have something here, something here, something here, something here, and then either a plus or a minus. And when you multiply out these 4 things, you need to get back to these 3 things at the beginning. And I know that sounds very wordy, but basically what this structure gives you is a way of taking 4 things being multiplied to give you 3 things. Okay, so what you do is you look at the number in front of y squared and it's a 1. And all you need to do then is go to this cross that you've drawn and ask yourself, what are the factors of 1? And 1 times 1 gives me 1. Now I've handled that term. Over here, you draw a line and you ask yourself, what is the coefficient of the middle term? Now the coefficient of the middle term here is going to be minus 13. And so I'm going to put in my little thing here, minus 13. Okay, now we've handled that bit there. Now you ask yourself the 42. What 2 numbers multiply together to give you 42? So you may say, well, 42 could be 21 times 2, or it could be 14 times 3. I think, wait, 14, 28 times 3. Or what else? 42 could be 7 times 6. Which factors do you think are going to get you closer to 13? I think 7 and 6 feel a lot like they're going to be involved with 13. And so what I do is I choose to focus on 7 and 6. And I put them here. And this is helpful because 7 times 6 will give me 42. Now all I need to do is decide what is the correct sign in front of a 7 and a 6. And because I end up with a negative 13, I'm going to make this a negative, and I'm going to make that a negative. And the way to check this is, and you multiply along the bracket. So 1 times minus 6 is minus 6. 1 times minus 7 is minus 7. If I add those together, I get minus 13. Okay, now the last step, and if this is the first time you've seen this, this is a bit of a mission. I read it off horizontally. So I'm looking horizontally, and I'm going to attach my variables to the 1. So I go 1y minus 7, and then I go 1y minus 6, because that is the second line. And just to show you I haven't made this up, okay, that it really is, I'm telling you the truth here. If you multiply this out, 1y times 1y is 1y squared. 1y times minus 6 is minus 6y. Minus 7 times y is minus 7y. And a negative times a negative is plus 42. So that does actually work. I've told you the truth, but I've taken a bit of time to do that. Now, if you've never seen this before, you may need a bit of practice on this, and that's not a problem. There will be modules on the Watobe website for grade 9 and 10 that you could go back and practice. So last step, a little bit faster. We're going to split it now, and we're going to say y minus 7 is 0, or y minus 6 is 0. And so my answer is then going to be y 7 or y is 6. And so that should be my final answer. Okay. Let me leave that there for a moment. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit. Sorry if you're getting dizzy. Let me go a little bit faster on the next, well, actually not too fast. So let's just do this properly today. There's really no need to go necessarily quickly. So I want to know from the crowd, from the students of the class, how do I deal with an equation like B? What is the first step I have to do? Because I haven't given you any indication in this lesson. If you were in my last lesson, you may have an idea, but I want to know, what do I need to do to solve this equation to get going? Because it's quite a bit harder than the other ones. And I want to see that in the chat. So please light up the chat, everyone. I want to see, what would your first step be? I see some things coming through. Okay. They're all broadly the same thing. So Nizole is saying multiply by y. Nizole, I absolutely agree. And the reason I want to multiply by y is that this y over here is making life difficult for me. And so if I multiply both sides by y, what I'm going to get is a y on this side. And I must be careful here and put a bracket around this, a y on that side. And so when I multiply both sides by y, I'm going to get 6 equals y times y plus 1. This is a critical step because it removes the fractions from our life, which makes things a bit easier. Okay, now I want you to solve this for me. So I want everyone to try and solve this for me. I want to give you a minute to do that. See if you can get to the answer.
So while we wait for them to calculate, I see Mosa's got their hand up. I don't know if they want to ask a question. Mosa, if you want to ask a question, just make sure to unmute your mic, please.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, sir. Can I please ask if, for the first one,
Yes.
How is there any other way that you could do, or maybe answer that question? Because this one that I'm seeing right now today, I don't know how to do it.
Okay.
So
When you
is
say
there any,
other
pardon?
way, when you say
Yes.
any other way, are you talking about the very first question of the day? Like one that I'm looking at now, 7t plus 2, that one.
Yes, that one. No, the 42 one.
Oh,
Yes.
the 42 one.
The
Okay.
13y minus 42 equals y squared.
So the good news is the way, there isn't really another way right now except the quadratic formula. If you
Yes.
knew how to use the quadratic formula, you could use that. But I think it's better for you to just go through. We're going to repeat this process a couple of times tonight. And so I think it's better if we just focus on the checklist. So just to go to show you the checklist, the first checklist is for a quadratic equation is to move everything to one side and have 0 on one side. Now, in order to get to that step, I had to multiply. And I'm trying to get to that step in B. And so I'm just going to model that same process again and just repeat it. And I think if I repeat it, it'll become easier each time. Because this is the pretty standard. There isn't really an easier way to do this. So I think the best thing is just to practice. So my next step is going to be to multiply these brackets. And then I'm stuck. I have a 6 on one side. So I take away 6 from both sides. And I get that. Okay, so now I've got to the end of step 2. But now I'm stuck with this factorizing step again. How do I factorize this thing? And some of you, because of your experience with this, may be able to even just read it off by looking at that. But just to remind you what it means to factorize. To factorize means to write as a product of factors. The two factors are the things in the bracket. Now, because this is quite a complicated looking thing, I need a process I can follow to help me figure out what goes inside here. And that's what I was trying to show you guys in the previous example. And I'm going to do it again. So the first thing I do is I draw a cross like this, and this cross represents cross multiplication. I didn't do this last time, but actually the middle term is probably the thing that anchors everything. And so the coefficient of the middle term is going to be +1. Now, the good news is the coefficient of the y squared is 1. And so in my little method, I'm just going to write a 1 and a 1 because 1 times 1 gives me the 1 that I'm looking for down here. Then I need to look at the 6. And this is where it gets interesting. When I look at the 6, I'm actually not very worried about the sign in front of it. I'm just worried about what are the factors that I could use to get 6. And I think I could use either 6 and 1 or 3 and 2. Now, in order to get to the +1 over here, I think that the 3 and 2 is a much better option to use. So I'm going to use the factors 3 and 2, and I'm going to pop them on this cross multiplication. And I have to ask myself now, if I'm multiplying along these lines and I want to end up with a +1, what should I make these things? So, for example, if I make this a plus and this a plus, will I end up with a +1 in the end? If I go 1 times 2 is 2 and 1 times 3 is 3, 3 plus 2 does not give me +1. So I've made a mistake. What I really want to do is one of them to be a positive and one of them to be a negative. So let's see. I think I want the 3 to be positive so that it's sort of is bigger than the 2. And if I do that, I will then get, so 1 times 3 is 3, 1 times -2 is -2, and that gets me to my +1. And now what I do is I just write this out. Oh, sorry, I wanted to use a yellow. If I write this out horizontally, and I always write it out horizontally, I attach a variable to the 1. What is the variable? It's y. So I get y +3. And then I get, if I go horizontally here, I get y -2. Who can remember what the next step is? What's the key word? So I've now factorized this. If I multiply it out, I would get back to what I started with, but instead it's factorized form. You split. I love it. Think like a banana split. Do you guys like banana splits? I love banana splits, by the way. And in fact, maybe I'll have one tonight. So if I split this, 0 equals y plus 3, and 0 equals y minus 2. That is the split that I was talking about earlier. And if either of these statements is true, the whole thing will be true. And so then if I solve these two equations, I take away 3 from both sides here, and I add 2 to both sides here. And I should get, let's make sure I don't make a silly mistake here, because I am going a little bit quickly. Or y is going to be equal to 2, or 2 is going to be equal to y. It's the same idea. Okay. So those are my two answers. Now, the other thing I need to point out is, especially now if I'm speeding up and going a little bit quickly, one of the benefits of this being recorded on the web is that you can literally go and watch this again before the next lesson. And I really would recommend that. But just to give me a feel as a teacher, how are you feeling about these types of questions? So thumbs up if you're feeling mostly okay, thumbs down if you're feeling like, oh, I feel very lost. It helps me get a feel for what's going on. I may not be able to help everyone straight away, but I just want to get a feel for that. Okay, well then, what I want is I want us to try and do, okay, so for those who are struggling, I want you to try and use that same checklist again, and we are going to try and do the current 4 questions on the board. This is going to be question D, E, and F. I am not going to say as much, but what I want you to do is I want you to use the checklist. So what did I say? So move everything to one side to get 0. And then I said you had to factorize. Then I said split. And then I said solve. So that is the sort of how to solve a quadratic equation. And then if you want to factorize, you have 3 methods available to you. Although in this case, I suspect the method is pretty clear already. So those are my hints. Okay, and I want you to get going with that. And I'm going to give you about, okay, so when you get the answer for D, put it in the chat so I know where you are. When you get the answer for E, put it in the chat so I know where you are. I'm probably going to give you about 8 minutes for this. So you're going to have quite a lot of time. So I don't want you to feel stressed. I'm going to slow right down because this will give you a better feel for how much you understand. But these questions are a little bit harder. So I haven't just kept it the same. I have okay, so Mosa, how do you use the steps? So first of all, if you look at D, can you see that everything is on one side? Everything's on one side and then the 0 is on the other side. So that step 1 is actually taken care of already. So now you're on to step 2, which is going to be, how do I factorize this thing? And so that is what I'm going to make this a bigger focus. Let's get rid of all this. So step 1 is move everything to one side and get 0. But if you get that for free in the question, that's not your fault. So you get it for free. So can you factorize this thing over here? Now, there's actually 2 ways you can do it. Some of you may notice something about 5s that is helpful. But if you find that your factorization isn't great, you will need to practice factorization to just get that skill down. And what I'm going to say is that in the next lesson, maybe Anya, what we can do is we can maybe put a link to any factorization sessions we've done with Watobe
Yes.
from the website.
Yes,
I think that will be helpful
definitely.
for students. Or maybe if you have a moment tonight, just have a look at the Watobe website, and maybe we can even pop a link from the YouTube channel or that in the chat for students who really feel like I need some more practice on this.
I'll go check now while you carry on.
Fantastic. So when I'm factorizing this, some of you will see that all of these have a 5 in common. And some of you will say, I want to go straight to the trinomial. And both of those are completely fine. I will go with whatever is the preferred method when I start. Okay. Okay, and Tanda, I'll have a look in a moment. I haven't actually looked ahead for this yet. So not everybody would have done this, but we'll all end up with the same answer in the end if we're correct. Let me just get rid of all this. I'm getting quite good at moving all my little bits and pieces around. I think that one way of factorizing this will give you that. Just give me a thumbs up if how many of you took the 5 out at the very beginning, which is completely fine to do. I'm just choosing to focus on the trinomial method, but give me a thumbs up if you took the 5 out at the very beginning. You got rid of, you know how to divide through by 5. Okay, guys, completely fine, not a problem. I'm focusing on this method of trinomials for the students who feel unsure about trinomials, and I'm trying to make it not too complicated. But basically, once you've done this, you've factorized it. Then after the factorization, we're going to get the split. Now, because I haven't, my split looks a little bit more complicated than the others, but, you know, I take away 5 from both sides. I get that. I get x. And I get... Okay, so my 2 answers that I get are x is -1 and x is 3. So for those, let's just make sure, so some of you may have made a little silly mistake with not getting the -1. Let's just make sure I'm on the right track. -15. Oh, I think I've made an error here. Let's quickly have a look. This needs to be a negative because 5 times -3 is -15. 1 times -5 is -5. So what that means is that I have made a little boo-boo there. And then we get 5x -5. Okay, so this bit over here. So we get 5 is 5x. And then if we divide both sides by 5, we get that. So apologies, x is 1 and x is 3. I'm going to give you a little bit more time for E and F. And then I think we're going to, whilst we're not, you definitely need to practice more quadratics. I think it is time for us to have a little break for today and a brain break. And then I will talk to you a little bit about inequalities. The answers for E, they're coming to a place near you soon, I promise. But feel free to share them because if you share them, if a lot of you get the same answer, it's likely you're on the right track.
Sorry about that, sir. I don't know what's happened there. I try to search videos and all of a sudden my Zoom just crashed completely. So I'm not sure if I missed anything or so.
No, we're going to finish off with quadratics in a moment. And we're just practicing these last two. And I'm going to try and factorize them a little bit quicker. But I do think students, I don't think what I'm doing is enough for you to learn factorization from scratch. Some of you may need a bit more practice. And I think I'm just sort of showing. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So, like I said, I'm not going to take the risk now to try and search while I'm on Zoom because my Zoom might crash again.
No, don't worry. Yeah.
But what I can do is I can go get some links aside so that on Wednesday's lesson, I can share it in the chat for those that will need extra practice on factorization.
No, not a problem at all. No, that's exactly where I think we should go with that. It was just a spur of the moment thing because I can see some students need a bit of extra practice. But I think we're doing well tonight in just consolidating the basics of this. So we're going to get...
Just something in the chat that I've noticed, it's a bit early on, about like 10 minutes ago or so.
Yes.
I think a lot of kids get confused. So think of a quadratic equation as being like this. Somewhere you've got a variable to the power of 2, right? Okay, then you know you're dealing with a quadratic, okay? Secondly, if you have a quadratic equation, one of the steps are going to be factorization. So you can't really solve a quadratic equation without factorizing. You need to remember you can't like the one and not like the other one. Sometimes there are things we don't like to do, but you just kind of have to do it to get through to the end. And try to see quadratic equations as being one of those items. But we'll go into that from today going forward. And then I see a hand from Nova Museta.
Yep, go ahead.
Sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since you chose 8 and 1, why did you choose 8 and 1? I thought they were supposed to add up to 15.
Let's see if I've made a... So I chose 2 and 1. Are you happy with my choice of 2 and 1? So what I did, the reason I chose 8 is, do you agree that 8 times 1 gives me 8, which is this bit here? Now, what I thought is that if I'd chosen, what are my other options? My other options are 2 and 4. And I didn't think 2 and 4 would get me to the plus 15. So what I did was I went 2 times 8 is, or 2 times plus 8 is plus 16. And 1 times minus 1 gives me minus 1. What do I get if I add the minus 1 and the plus 16? I get the plus 15. So that's why I chose the 8 and the 1. Now, because if I multiply out, it gives me these numbers. Now, what's different is when I read it off horizontally. So that's why you see this 2x minus 1 down here, because I'm attaching an x to this side. And then the next line is going to be x plus 8, like that. Does that help a little bit? I hope it does. That's what my thinking. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to go through F right now. I will put F up in the next lesson because I think what we need is a break, and we actually just want to squeeze in some inequalities today. Or actually, maybe Anya, could you maybe in the background later on in the lesson work this out? I don't know if I'm throwing it on you, but you don't have to. But and then
I can do that.
Yeah, and I'm going to give students a brain break now, just because I feel like I've been working them very hard, and I want them to just stand up and take a break. So the last 10 minutes or so, we can squeeze something else in.
Cool. You can do that, sir.
Fantastic. So everybody, I want you to get up from your tables because I've really pushed you today, and I want you to stand. And let's see if I can see me. I want you to stand up, and I want you to try and do this thing that we were doing the other day, which is called a pen flip. And it's no easy thing to do, let me tell you. And the way you do it is you take a pen and hold it on the one side, and you lift it up, and you try and spin it only once or rotate it once. Ooh, and catch. And even if you don't catch it, the process of doing it engages your brain so fully that it's a really nice break. But if you can do it, then you get a gold star from me as well. Okay. So I want you to do that and try and pen flip. And if you think you're so cool and you've got it down, then I challenge you to do it with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, try and do it with your left hand.
So while you guys are doing pen flipping, I've got that down for you. But you guys must enjoy the pen flipping. This has been an intense session so far. You guys are doing so well.
Yeah.
Canva, you definitely deserve a gold medal. And I think I deserve a participation certificate because I cannot catch that pen no matter how hard I try.
It's, you know, okay, I'll give you a little secret. So if your pen is weighted, so if you've got like a teacher marker, it's actually much easier when you flip a pen that has a bit of weight. The moment you have like a very thin pen like this, it's actually really hard because the weight is, yeah, I know, a little bit of weight on one side makes the flip easier. Okay, so that is one of my favorite things to do in class. And so then for the people who are doing F, Miss Anya will post the answers in the chat. But for now, I want to, because it's got fractions and things, I feel like I want to spend the last 5 or 10 minutes just introducing one other topic called inequalities. And so I'm going to move over to that. And I hope that you had a chance to stand and just kind of loosen up a little bit. I'm going to take away a lot of the stuff that's on the board and just focus on some simple stuff. So first of all, what is an inequality? Let's have a look at one to finish the lesson today. So an inequality is a lot like an equation, except that instead of having an equal sign, we have this sort of crocodile mouth thing. And in this case, this is called a, well, it could be a greater than or equal to, or a less than or equal to. And so the first thing to ask yourself is, what does it mean to solve an inequality? Because if we solve an equation, we know that when we solve an equation, we're looking for a value that makes the statement true. And to be honest, it's the same with an inequality. You're just looking for a number that you know will make the statement true. So let's just use some trial and error methods to start with. If I said to you, x is equal to 1 is a solution to this inequality, let's see if that's correct. So I'm going to put the 1 where there is an x. And I want to ask you, is that statement mathematically true? So in order to do that, I have to go 2 times 1 is 2, 2 plus 2 is 4. Is 4 less than or equal to 1? Give me a thumbs up if you think it is. Give me a thumbs down if you think 4 is not less than or equal to 1. So thumbs up if you think that statement is true, thumbs down if you think it's false. Okay, so clearly 4 is not less than or equal to 1. So it turns out I was fibbing and x is 1 is not an answer. What if I said x is 7? If I put x is 7, if I say that's a solution to this inequality, I'm going to put a 7 in here and I'm going to do this. 2 times 7 is 14 plus 1 is 16 less than or equal to 1? No. So it feels a bit random because I'm going along and I'm testing all these values, and yet surely there's a simpler way to do this. So it turns out there is. And basically, when you solve an inequality, it's treated a lot like an equation, except for a couple of sneaky things we have to watch out for. Basically for today, we'll treat them the same as an equation. And so in an equation, you would try and move everything to one side. And so I would start by taking away 2 from both sides. And so I'd get 2x is less than or equal to minus 1. So that's step number 1. Now, if we go back into lesson 2, I think, or lesson 1 in this unit, if you want to solve something, you often need to get the variable by itself. And in this case, I'd really like to get rid of this 2. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And so then 2 over 2 is 1, and x is less than or equal to minus a half. Now, this looks a lot more like something meaningful. Now, these steps are all reversible, but I've ended up with a statement which says x must be less than or equal to minus a half. Well, let's test this out. What number is less than or minus a half? Let's try minus 1. So let's just say x is minus 1. And let me do what I was doing at the beginning. 2 times minus 1 plus 2 less than or equal to 1. What is 2 times minus 1 plus 2? It's going to be 0. Is 0 less than 1? Yes, it is. So it turns out my method has worked. I found a way to find good solutions. Now, the only other difference with an inequality is we put the solution on a number line because there are infinitely many solutions. Because the solution to an inequality is any number. So let's put the number that's important. Let's put that number. Some teachers put it on top, some teachers put it at the bottom. Let's go to minus a half on the number line. And what I'm going to do is I draw a little dot, and the dot is colored in because it includes minus a half. The solutions to this inequality are all numbers less than or equal to minus a half. And so we illustrate our solution in this way. So basically, you treat it as an equation, except that it gets its own little funky number graph at the end. That's essentially how you solve an inequality. And now, the answers to this, I can see visually, minus 1 would be an answer, minus 2 would be an answer, minus 2.5 would be an answer, because they all exist in this part of the number line. But if I chose 1 or 2, that wouldn't be it. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm getting quite a few messages in the chat about kids asking, well, what happened to the 2, the one in the middle of the equality? I just want to show you guys, remember it's 2x plus 2 is less than or equal to 1. We first take the 2 across, so we say 2x is less than or equal to 1 minus 2, and that is also got the negative 1. I hope that answers your question. Right, so you can carry on.
Perfect. So basically, I did that step first. I took away 2 from both sides, and that's how I got to this step here. And then I divided by 2 on both sides. That was my step. Okay, so I was using some of the knowledge from earlier in the course. Now, I don't want to do that one. I don't want to do that one. I want to do this one. So let us finish today with this inequality question. And I want you guys to try and mimic what I was doing over here. And there's one sneaky thing with inequalities that may come up that I'm going to show you. But essentially for today, I just want you to try this. Then I'm going to give you the answer. And then we're going to call it a day for today because we've done a lot. So I want you, the question is to solve this inequality and then represent your answer on the number line. See what you can do. See what you get. And then I will come along and then we will finish. I think I moved my camera around when I was jumping around the pen flipping. Yeah, there we go. So I think these brackets need to be dealt with somehow. Now, what techniques can we use from earlier on in the lesson when we want to solve an equation that has this? So in Tando, you won't, yeah, I think you guys are on the right track. I can see things are happening there. Let's have a look. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to deal with the x's first. And I'm going to say, if I add 2x to both sides, and I'm not writing this in, I'm just balancing the equation, I'm adding 2x to both sides, I'm going to get 1 is greater than 4x minus 12 plus 2x. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 12 to both sides, and I get 1 plus 12. And there's many ways of doing this. Equals greater than 6x. And so then I get 13 is greater than 6x. Now, what's interesting here, I'm going to move this question up here, is I divide both sides by 6. And again, 13 divided by 6 on both sides, I'm going to get this. Now, look at the direction of the crocodile mouth. Now, I might have jumped a little bit too fast for some of you. Let me actually do the extra step. So basically what I'm doing is I'm doing this. And so 6 over 6 is nothing. And so I get 13 over 6. Now, what's really important is to focus on the x. The x has to be less than 13 over 6, or in decimals, whatever you get, 2.16. And if you answer this question, you normally have to illustrate it on a number line. And so your answer is going to have 13 over 6 on the number line. But what direction am I going to be going in? Well, x is smaller than 13 over 6. So I'm going to be going in the left direction. And also I'm going to have an empty donut, not a colored in one, because I'm not including the point 13 over 6. So this is really important. In inequalities, you will see whether or not you color in this dot is important. And the reason I haven't colored the dot in is that the question says x must be strictly less than 13 over 6. And because of that, when I draw the graph that shows all my answers, I have an open dot. Now, just to kind of almost try to illustrate why am I suddenly drawing number lines? Like, where did that come from? Is that an inequality doesn't just have 1 or 2 solutions. What this number line is saying is if I choose a number less than 13 over 6, so in fact, let me choose a different color just to really emphasize this. If I choose a number less than 13 over 6, like the number 1, let's say, what did I do, guys? If I choose the number 1, this number 1 will be an answer to the inequality because it's in the zone that is acceptable. And I can show you this by going back to the original equation. So if I look at the original equation, if I go minus 2 times 1 plus 1, is that greater than 4, 1 minus 3? Let's see. Minus 2 plus 1 is minus 1. And then this minus 2 is minus 8. Now, this may confuse you, but minus 8 is in fact less than minus 1. And so the answer, this number line contains a lot of information. I will talk about inequalities from the very beginning in the next lesson. Our next lesson is a revision lesson, but at least half of it is going to be spent on inequalities. And so this was just a warm-up for that. Yeah.
Sorry, so the kids are getting a bit confused. So
Okay.
a lot of, they're fine of getting 13 over 6. They're fine of that, but they're getting a bit confused with the arrow direction in your number line and that. Just maybe, and explain to them why they can't say x is greater than 13 over 6.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm gonna say for today, this is good enough. I will talk in the next lesson exactly how the number line is connected, but I'll just leave you with this. If I say to you, the answer to this inequality is all numbers that are less than 2. Do you agree? I'm saying 2 because 13 over 6 is almost 2. Do you agree that there are a lot of numbers on the number line that are below 2? So that's all I'm saying is the answer to the inequality is x is all numbers that are less than 13 over 6. If you think of a number line, there are a lot of numbers, if you start at 2, that are less than 2. And what the number line graph gives us is a way of explaining that, but I don't really want to actually, I think I've given you too much today, and if I try and do more, I'm actually going to make you more stressed than you need to be. So all I want you to leave with today is inequalities are sort of like equations, except that they don't just have one answer, they have many answers. If you've got that, that's enough for today. Okay, Anya, I think that would be a good place to finish.
Definitely, I agree.
Any comments? Look, guys, I've pushed you quite hard today. I just want to say, like, if you're feeling a bit unsure, don't stress. We'll do a lot of the next lesson will be a recap of this lesson. And so if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, just give yourself the night off and say, I get 9 out of 10 just for coming here and practicing and making an effort. Okay, it's almost 7. So I just want to ask, Anya, are there any final announcements or anything that we need to know about?
Yeah, just one thing, guys. We should have said in the beginning, but it doesn't really matter. If you guys find these Watobe sessions to be useful and that you enjoy them and that you want to continue watching these videos, please, please, please speak to your parents, your guardians, whoever you live with, to remember to please make the payment so that you can continue watching these. Obviously, if you only started down the last week or so, you're probably still in your free trial period, so that won't affect you. But if your parents also have received a message about payment, please pull through. All right, that's all for me.
Before you guys go, one of the things we like to do, just to keep track of how useful things are, is we always try and make our lessons as beneficial as possible. If you could just give us a sense of feedback about how you're experiencing the lessons, and so we can incorporate that into our next lesson planning. Okay. It'd be super helpful. And again, no one's perfect. We're just trying to do the best that we can in the context. But if we get feedback, it makes it a bit easier to kind of gauge where we should be at.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
May I please ask?
Yeah.
My mom said that these lessons are quite free for 14 days, and I'm going to pay off.
Yes.
True.
So there's a free trial for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, if you want to be part of the Zoom call, there is a payment required.
Okay. How much is the fee?
So it is 299 Rand a month or 75 Rand a week, if I remember correctly. Anya, am I on the money there? Like, excuse the pun.
I think you're quite right, sir.
Yeah. So that is the cost. The videos themselves are always available on YouTube, but to be part of the group and shaping the direction of the lesson, because we do try and adapt it to the students' needs, it costs that much to be part of it. But the videos themselves are also available.
Hello.
Okay. All right, everyone. I see most of you have filled in the poll. Like I said, Thursday is mostly going to be a revision session of what we've done so far. There will also be a